I'll just kick off by acknowledging country in my mother tongue of Bahasa Indonesia. So pertama-tama, saya ingin mengutarakan rasa hormat saya kepada Tuan Tanah Negeri ini, terutama kepada bangsa Kulin. So my name is Rani Pramesti. I'm the daughter of Dini Yusuf and Oki Lukita. My family clan names are Yusuf, E, Lim, Kwa, and Parura. I'm the program producer at Theatre Network Australia, and I produce the Victorian Independent Producers Initiative. I am a person in my early 30s. I have red, brown, and black hair. I am wearing black-rimmed glasses and a maroon scarf, as well as long-sleeved blue top. So a little bit about the Victorian Independent Producers Initiative, otherwise known as VIPI. VIPI supports independent producers and through them, independent artists and companies in the performing arts based in Victoria. VIPI is an initiative of the Victorian government through Creative Victoria, delivered in partnership with Theatre Network Australia. There are 3 streams of VIPI, the Unlocking Capacity Grant, the Producers Mentorship Program, and the Salon Series. My colleague Jamie will be posting the link to the VIPI website in the chat box. And today is a VIPI Salon Series. So a little bit about the VIPI Salon Series. These are professional development sessions, networking, and peer learning for the independent performing arts sector. Now, before we get started on the conversation with our panelists, I will run through some very quick housekeeping for the session. This session will run for 90 minutes, starting with a conversation with our panelists, and then we will have a 5-minute break at around 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and open up to the group for about 20 minutes of Q&A. Just a little bit about Zoom protocols if you're not familiar. You can actually, in the top right-hand corner, you can switch your view to either speaker view or gallery view. Speaker view will focus on who is speaking at the time, or the gallery view allows you to see all of the speakers and interpreters at the same time. For access reasons, as much as possible, please don't use the chat box today, because some people are not able to participate in a whole other conversation in the chat box. But you can use the Q&A box to ask questions directly. Or if you want to ask a question in person, you can click on the raise your hand button, and you can join the panelists on screen to ask your question. Again, there's 20 minutes towards the end for Q&A. The session is being closed captioned by Marissa Saroka and Lachlan Mackenzie Spencer. If you'd like the captioning to be visible to you, again, please click on the closed caption button at the bottom of your window. The session also has live Auslan interpretation, and thanks to our interpreters, Amber Richardson and Susan Emerson. Again, if you missed it earlier, you can click on their video in the top right-hand corner and click pin video to make sure that they are visible to you. This session will be recorded, and we will publish the video online on the Theatre Network Australia website. And finally, if you drop off Zoom at any point, please reconnect through the link. And yeah. Okay, great. So that's the housekeeping that we have for today. I'll get started by giving some quick intros to the producers. If the panelists can now turn on their cameras. I'll kick off by introducing Ade Djajamihardja. So Ade has been a screen media professional since 1988 at both national and international levels, and is now expanding into the performing arts space. As an Asian Australian from a Muslim family and a stroke survivor living with disability, Ade contributes a rich and unique perspective on producing. I will just also quickly say Eid Mubarak for anyone who is celebrating Eid al-Adha today. Bro Ade and Kate, did you want to do a quick audio description of yourself?
Thank you, Rani. Speaking personally, yes, my name is Bro Ade, as Rani briefly said. I am a stroke surviving wheelchair user who has rib paralysis on the mouth. So I'd like to both apologise and note appreciation at the same time for my speech. I'm honestly trying as best I can to speak as clearly as possible. But I understand that it may not come across as such, so please let me know and I'll happily repeat myself anytime. Visual description, I am Indonesian in appearance. I'm statistically very much ridiculously good looking, but I'm not, I know, just a joke, but it's just fun. And I'm wearing black rimmed glasses and sitting in my wheelchair.
Thank you, Bro Ade. And you are ridiculously good looking.
Oh, you're very sweet.
It's very objective opinion. So I'll move on to Alison Halit. So Alison is a producer who works with artists, venues, and festivals with shared interests in contemporary and experimental performance to produce intercultural collaborations, co-creations, tours, and residencies. She's worked extensively in Australia, Europe, North America, and Asia. Alison, do you mind giving a quick description of yourself?
Yes, so I'm a woman. I'm in my early 50s. I have brown hair and I have green eyes. I'm wearing a light coloured top today. I have headphones on and lipstick because I love lipstick. Historically, I grew up in regional Victoria. My father is Albanian Muslim. I grew up in an Albanian Muslim home. My mother, interestingly, is Scottish and Presbyterian, so that was kind of quite an interesting, diverse upbringing that I got to experience. Yeah, and I've lived in Melbourne most of my life and travelled quite a lot internationally. And the artists I'm currently working with are Luke George, who is the current Australia Council Dance Fellow. I'm working with feminist choreographer Prue Lang. I'm working with Indigenous performance maker Joel Bray. I'm working with alternative cabaret artist Leah Shelton and also the experimental art collective Aphids.
Thanks, Ali. I'll move on to Cien. So Cien is an independent producer from Singapore. Since 2006, he has assumed positions at arts organizations, including ArtStage, Singapore, and Culture Link, and many others. And this year, he is pursuing the Master of Arts and Cultural Management at the University of Melbourne. Cien, did you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thank you to Rani for the invitation. I'm a Singapore Chinese man. I'm in the late 30s. I have black hair. I'm sitting in front of a white wall, and today I'm wearing a black and white sweater. And I have black eyes. As Rani introduced, I'm primarily an independent producer. I'm from Singapore. So this year, I've left home. I'm spending most of 2020 in Melbourne, studying at the University of Melbourne, where I'm undertaking the course of Masters of Arts and Cultural Management. And today I'm reminded that it's Hari Raya Haji back home. It's a public holiday. And I know there could be some colleagues from Southeast Asia, from around the region. So I wish them Selamat Hari Raya Haji. And I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Cien. And last but definitely not least is Freya Waterson. So Freya is an independent producer based in Melbourne, working across art forms. In the decade prior to establishing her independent practice, she held roles with many presenting and producing organizations in Australia and the UK. Freya works with a small group of ambitious contemporary performing artists to create new work, driving projects from inception through to presentation. Freya is also the senior producer for Chunky Move, leading the company alongside artistic and executive directors of Chunky Move. Freya, did you want to do a quick intro?
Hi, I'm Freya. I have shoulder length blonde hair and I'm wearing a white shirt. I have blue eyes and I also have white headphones, and behind me is a kind of red background with plants because that's my balcony. As part of my independent practice, I work with a number of independent artists, including Alistair McIndoe, Lillian Steiner, Melanie Lane, Thembi Sodol, Lara Toms, Sophia Bruce, Lucy Gerenink, and Chambermaid. And as Rani mentioned, I'm also one of the co-leaders of Chunky Move.
Thanks so much, Freya. So for all the attendees, we have the next 45 minutes or more actually to be in discussion with the panelists. And then again, it's followed by 20 minutes of Q&A with all of you, the audience. And the topic for today's VIPI Salon series is actually questions that I get asked a lot as the producer of the Victorian Independent Producers Initiative. It's a popular one. And in fact, again, my colleague Jamie can post in the chat. There's actually a really wonderful series produced by Melbourne-based independent producer Laura Milky Garner, which actually unpacks some of these questions of what is a producer and what is producing. So I thought it would be great to start here, you know, in terms of restarting the VIPI Salon series for this year. So what is a producer? What is producing? And more specifically, what does an independent producer do? For the panelists, we're not expecting you to cram every single, you know, one of your experiences in response to these questions. Please feel free to take what angle you would like to focus on in response. It would be so great to hear your experiences working as a producer, both within organizations as well as independently, locally, as well as internationally. So I'll start with Bro Ade. Go ahead, Ade.
Thank you, Rani. Well, happy I'm referring to my notes as I talk to you, but the role of a producer is a multifaceted leadership role. We also have to convincingly play the parts of visionary, initiator, instigator, nurturer, facilitator, troubleshooter, project manager, enabler, motivator, coach, battlefield commander, and overall opportunity maximizer. And what type of producer am I aspiring to be? Well, speaking personally, I'm an independent and creative producer. Creative because I'm also a conceptualizer and a writer. Though I'm not a venue or festival producer or a company producer, though I have successfully worked as a company producer in the past for television stations in Asia. I'm also an independent producer because I also enjoy generating the project-based nature of the work, as well as enjoying building and nurturing relationships with particular artists by supporting their work, discovering an alignment of intention and values, which could then lead to a binding synergy of purpose. I also enjoy embracing the responsibility of being the one where the buck stops and building relationships with independent artists. Is it helpful, Ray?
Very helpful, Bro Ade. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry,
Yep.
Only if I can just elaborate. In 2009, I co-produced the Indonesian feature film Coming Jantan, and with the poster behind me here, and then that was a classic case of a producer's role becoming a conduit, because in the script, the intention the Indonesian producers want to do was to shoot Cien on a bus. And I said, whoa, slow down. First, we've got to get permits, liaise with bus company, councils, and so forth. So, you know, there was a lot of drawing a peaceful unity between the intentions of the Indonesian crew and the Australian crews. So the playing a part of conduit is an essential part of a producer's role.
Yeah. And it sounds like that scenario you're describing there, Bro Ade, it involved being a conduit both on a cultural level, but also just a logistical level.
And ensuring that the legal fulfillments were adhered to on both sides too. And creating a space for cultural safety.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Bro Ade. I'll just move us on to another perspective on these questions. Freya, did you want to keep us continuing along?
Sure. Rani, can you remind me of the question that we're answering here? Sorry.
Yes, it's anyone that you want to choose out of these interconnecting ones. So it's what is a producer, what is producing, what does an indie producer do?
All of them. Wow. Okay.
Oh, you don't have to. That's what I meant.
No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
I think, you know, Rani is right that this is a really, the term producer is quite nebulous. It means really different things across the performing arts, and Ade has also just sort of indicated there some of the nuances between different kind of art forms as well. I think personally, when I consider that bigger question about what is a producer, I often come back to some text that was written as part of a book that was published. I think it was commissioned and published by the British Council in 2014. And even though, you know, the world is fast moving, I feel like a lot of these ideas are still really relevant. So Rani, if you don't mind, I might just read just a small paragraph from this, because I feel like it still is relevant now and that it encapsulates this kind of broad spectrum. So reading directly from the kind of opening introduction to the book, which is called Producers, Alchemists of the Impossible, the producer is a role that has struggled to establish itself in the arts, yet at this time of massive social, cultural and environmental change, perhaps we've never needed producers more. The producer helps to realise new responses and routes through the complex changes in our globalised world, unlocks so much of the public value of the arts, and works with artists to create the experiences beyond our imaginings, experiences that allow us to identify what it means what art means in our lives. And there are many possibilities as individuals journey through their producing lives. The producer as long-term collaborator, the producer as initiator of projects and ideas, as organisational leader, as fast-moving independent, as cultural and social activist, as entrepreneur and business brain, as innovator, facilitator and supporter, or as guru empowering others, which is hilarious. And obviously, with such a wide-ranging interpretation, it can get complicated, even within your own individual practice. You know, I actually would say that I personally work as both sort of organizational leader through my role as Chunky Move, but also, you know, much more different and kind of more, yeah, I guess free-flowing way as an independent producer. So, you know, I hope that's kind of helpful.
That's really great.
In terms of a broader kind of idea. And it is very similar to what Ade was saying there, this idea of kind of multiplicity.
So very helpful, and thanks for directing us to that resource as well, Freya.
Yeah, I will also, I know that you didn't want us to put things in the chat, but I can also share a free link to read this book, which focuses on a number of independent producers from that time, some of whom are still working, but it's an interesting scope, but I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah, we are posting links in the chat. My note about that in terms of not using the chat was just sometimes there's a whole other conversation that happens in the chat, and we've learned just from past experience, it shuts some people out from that
no
additional
problem.
conversation. That wasn't just directed to you, Freya. It was just like overall. So thank you. I'll move us on to Kuan. Did you want to give us your thoughts? And do you need me to repeat the questions at all, or are you all good?
No, it's fine. Maybe to think of the question, what does a producer do? I also acknowledge the multiplicity, the sophistication, the hyphenated identities that producers do and the roles that they take on. And I think perhaps it's not so interesting to offer a definition of what a producer is or does. I like to think of that what a producer do is often relational. It is very contextual, it's very specific to the project, to the artists or the collaborators that you're working with or partnering with in any instance. The context of the site, the time, the moment, the city you're in. And often I find myself, it's to really acknowledge what needs to be done, the gaps that no one else is taking. Because often I feel like the producer, like what Ade and Freya has spoken, we have all these skills that we need to tap on any time, the knowledge to be a cultural leader, to be a person to counsel in faith with the collaborators, with the artists, both many independent artists of different forms in the last few years. And I think in every project is different. There are some projects which, for example, going on tour, if there's no like stage manager on site, then I may be expected to fill in that role. And I think it's often that is through that conversation with your artist, a collaboration, very importantly at the beginning, that you defined what you bring and to the project and where it goes. So I like to think of it as relational first and foremost.
That came across really clearly, Kuan. Thank you for your perspectives. And Ali, did you want to share your perspectives?
Yes, I feel like my three co-producers here today have already summed it up really well in terms of the diversity of what a producer is and I think it's a really important point because I feel that there's so many different types of producers that specialize in various areas, and so much of it is about finding the right producer and the right artist, which is moving on to another question, but to find the right kind of producer for your work or for what you want to make and what you want to do. And I think that that's one thing I did want to say, that I feel like there's quite a difference between producers who are working in an organisational structure and producers that are not working in an organisational structure and are working independently, or as I would rather say, interdependently, quite strongly. And I feel there's a lot more freedom when you're working outside an organisation. Freya, you'd have such a first-hand view of what this really feels like right now, because you've got a massive contrast in your producing work, which is really fascinating, I think. And I feel that in the independent sector, I feel there's an opportunity to make your producing work much more tailored to the specific needs of an artist, but also to be much more creative and to be much more individualized in the way that you want to work, and then to find the right sort of projects or people or artists or whatever to apply that skill to, or to develop skills in collaboration, maybe with an artist or an organisation or a festival or something, where you can sit down together and you can reinvent something about the way that you work, and you can actually kind of reinvent your own producing practice too. You don't have to follow specific ways of thinking historically, the way a producer might think. You can actually really explore new and different things if you want to. Yeah, that were thoughts I wanted to add.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Ali, for bringing up that word interdependently. It's actually a great segue to the next question, which is about that relationship, right, between independent artists. Oh, sorry, Bro Ade, you wanted to say something?
Just a little footnote, really, please, Ray. I just want to say that while producers really have to be in their own sense of jack of all trades, I think there is nuance in value and humility for producers to admit they can't do everything, but sometimes they have to delegate, or partner appoints to help fill the gaps. Because just elaborating on that, just regarding the very crucial dynamic between the producer, independent producer, and artiste, I always believe that in a healthy investment of.
Hang on, Bro Ade. Sorry, Bro Ade, are you answering the second question now?
Sorry.
Because I haven't said the question yet.
Sorry.
Confuse people.
Sorry,
hang on. Sabar. So the next question is, what are some things independent artists can gain from working with an independent producer? And so what is the value? What value does independent producers bring to the project or to the artist? So take it away, Bro Ade.
Well, the value we bring is that we provide a independent third party that can help bring the knowledge, skills, and contacts to get things done, to allow the artiste to focus on their performance, which is an important headspace issue as well. I have also always strived to create an environment of open and respectful candor, where I'm always asking how I can better support the artist as a producer and facilitate an environment which allows you to do your best work. So that's the facilitator part of it, So the value we bring, I think, is quite clear and obvious, but it ultimately is a union of, if a bit of a synergy of souls, so to speak. That's a bit too cuddly, sorry.
It's okay. Your views are totally valid, Bro Ade. So, yeah, thank you. Great. So I'll move us on. I'll switch it up a little bit, and maybe I'll go to Ali first, actually. Well, next.
Yeah. Could I just hear the question again, please, Rani?
Sure. So what are some things independent artists can gain from working with an independent producer? And you might also want to think about what value does an independent producer bring to the project or to the artist?
Well, I think that the benefits are really enormous. But I think the fundamental thing that needs to take place when artists and producers decide to work together is that the artist really needs to trust the process, because not a lot necessarily happens to begin with. It takes time to really feel the benefits of working with a producer and to actually really feel that value. So there's got to be a really strong commitment and investment on both sides to actually working together and to going through this process that may not have a lot of outcome for maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years or something, until you've really built something that goes to another place. And I kind of feel like, if I look back now at artists who I've known for a long time, and I'm of an age now where I've noticed that artists that don't work with producers, generally speaking, this is a massive generalization, but the career can only really move so far. And then there are artists who have invested in working with a producer over a long period of time, and there's just some point where things just start to really ramp up and their careers grow exponentially, like incredibly so, and they go to a whole other level. And I think it's because of that commitment and that time and that investment on all levels, practical, financial, emotional, the whole thing. And that eventually, because you've got two people kind of collaborating, where I think it works best on the producing, because it's silly not to think that artists don't self-produce, because of course they do. Like, it's a collaboration on the producing aspects of the art making, basically. You've got like two minds, you've got two whole networks, you've got a whole lot, and then you potentially have other producers you're working with as well, and other people, artists and collaborators that are expanding all of this continually. And so I think the benefits, you know, say across a longer period of time, at 5 to 10 years, are immense, actually. Yeah, they're the main things. And I think that, the key to it really, and it's probably going into the next question a little bit, but the key to it is really finding a artist-producer relationship, and a producer that has the right kinds of networks for your work and connections, but also the right sensibility to understand your work from its cultural and political and artistic perspectives, and is able to kind of embrace that and harness that and represent that and support it and talk about it and write about it and, you know, live it with you. So I think they're my main sort of points.
Yeah, thank you, Ali.
Yeah,
it's interesting. As I was listening to you, it made me think about Kuan Cien's earlier points about, you know, how it's very much relational. And of course, you know, the time aspect is an important part of building relationships. So it makes perfect sense what you've just said. I will move it on to, I think, Kuan Cien, you haven't had the chance to respond to this yet, have you?
No. Yeah. Happy to respond. I would say that maybe we could think of it as two halves of the equation of the relationship. I think of what the producer brings to the table. I think there's the tangibles, which is just your skills, your knowledge in fundraising, in getting an engagement, in brokering a tour, in securing the contract. But I also feel like there's also the intangibles of the time when you spend having a coffee or meal together, a late night chat, or just talking as friends. I think do both sides feed into one another into a greater whole. I was reminded when we in Singapore, we hosted Square and Sums, the Malaysian New Zealand producers from Auckland, and what they said was really quite true, is that you, as a producer, you can't really work with someone else if you can't sit down for a meal together, to enjoy a proper meal together as friends. And I think that rings so true, because to be able to hang out, to chat randomly about things, to generate ideas, I think that's where the creativity also comes from, in the collaborative relationships, which is what I refer to as the intangibles, that part of the relationship. But But in terms of the tangibles, I feel coming from a context in Singapore where we do not have so much, especially for independent artists, we do not have organizations like TNA or NAVA, which I would describe as maybe sector support kind of industry organizations. So very often people, artists, or may not know what to do when it comes to piecing a project together. They may not have the resources to consult on, for example, intellectual property, how to apply for a grant. And I think this is where I feel like the independent producers step in, because they mediate between the funder, the artists, the sponsors, the partners in that role. And I feel like coming from Singapore, that could be a bit contentious and sensitive, because by and large, there's in a way, the idea of gatekeeping of content is still prevalent in Singapore. For example, you have to apply for a license to stage a production. So to understand the in and outs of what it means to stage a production it is quite crucial. And I think the producer holds that kind of knowledge and the expertise, and to take care of that, the side of things. Yeah.
Thank you, Kuan, and thanks for the specific context that you're aware of as well in Singapore. Bro Ade, did you have something you wanted to add? Did I see your hand up?
You did, thank you. Sorry, just to elaborate on what Alison's good point was, I believe a good producer can really help fulfill and realize a project's optimal potential. That is to say that rather than just stage a successful season, they can go the next step of taking it on tour and really online even, and just really, you know, elaborating, exhausting its reach to audience and impact. That makes sense.
Bro Ade. Thank you. Yep. And Freya, would love to hear from you about your thoughts on what value does an independent producer bring to the project or to the artist?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things that, as I'm sort of listening to the other producers here, there's kind of two things that I'm sort of thinking about, and Ali touched on one of them, which is, you know, certainly not all artists need a producer. Not all artists want to work as a producer, and I think, or want to work with an independent producer. And I think, you know, it's quite important to recognise that this is one option that might work for some artists. And I definitely agree with what people have said about this kind of long-term spectrum, because whilst not all artists and projects that you work with do become those things, in my opinion, I really agree with this sentiment that the most successful outcomes come from that opportunity to build trust. But I guess I just, you know, I am aware that there's a lot of self-producing artists who do that work really well. And it's really just about a spectrum of kind of ways of working. And the second thing is more of a sort of structural observation about perhaps why independent producing is such a specific kind of practice in certain places, and as Kuan Tien pointed out, is different depending on kind of where you work. But in Australia, I think one of the reasons that independent producers and artists working in those relationships have kind of flourished and continue to exist is you know, really because it's incredibly difficult for many artists and collectives and small companies to become larger funded entities. There is a limit to what can be achieved, and has been diminishing. Those types of elevated kind of versions of company structures have been diminishing over many years. And so in some ways, independent producer kind of can form that relationship that's like a company, but is much more flexible, much more kind of able to adapt to individual artists and the opportunities, the pace that they work at. So I think it's just something to observe also for people who are coming from different contexts, because I think this is sort of relevant in Australia as to why there's, you know, perhaps quite a sophisticated network of independent producers here.
Thanks for bringing that up as well, Freya, because even a program like the Victorian Independent Producers Initiative, you know, came about because of a lot of advocacy on the part of independent producers, some of whom are here today. So thank you for bringing up that specific, you know, context to Australia. Ali, did you put up your hand?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to add a couple of things to that because it's really interesting, Freya. I think one of the things I've observed across my producing career is that for the first 6 years, I was actually the executive producer of a company. And then for the last 9 years, I've run my own practice. And one of the reasons I stopped working for an organization was really because I spent all my time running an organization and not really producing, but actually just, hitting all these KPIs and, doing all of this operational stuff and running a board and doing all these things. And I found amazingly frustrating because it was hard to stay close to the art and the artists. And that's one of the magical things about independent producing is you can get really close to the work and the artists and actually produce from the perspective of this is the artwork, or this is the festival, or this is the project, or this is the program. And what does these specific pieces of art at this moment in time need from a producing perspective? And then you can bring your skill base as a producer to that really effectively, just literally the things that are required to make this particular show go into that theatre, or this one go online, or this one go wherever it needs to go. And it's incredibly efficient and really useful. And I think we're generating a lot more art and at a higher quality overall in those more, well, not necessarily at a higher quality, but I think there's a lot of benefit for the art and the artists in that kind of relationship, I think. Yeah.
And it sounds like with that point as well, Ali, it's because you love art and you love artists. That's, also part of the reason why you're choosing to work in that way as well, right? It's your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's probably another point too about different types of producers too, because, you might want to be an organizational producer and a more administratively based producer. Like that's another aspect of producing. And it's not that you don't take that to an independent practice, but it's just that the focus of what you spend most of your time doing might be different. Whereas if you're in an organization, you might spend more time doing other things. It sort of depends on, what type of a producing career you want to have. I mean, there's a lot of choice.
And how you're, I suppose, in service of art and the artists, it's just different models of engagement.
Exactly.
I will just do a quick radio update for anyone who's just joined us. So you're listening to the VIPI Salon Series featuring producers Cien, Alison, Halit, Freya, Waterson, and Djajamihardja, and we're having a conversation about producing. So don't forget that if you have any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A function down the bottom bar. And if you'd like to see closed captioning for the conversation, just click on the closed caption or CC button at the bottom of your screen. So I'll move us on to the next question. And Bro Ade, I'll start with you again. In your experience, what makes a relationship between independent artists and independent producers work? We've touched on some elements of this, but let's unpack it some more. Go ahead, Bro Ade.
Well, like any successful relationship, I believe it requires a healthy investment of time, energy, and effort. And you have to build a relationship where you can nurture the trust and communication between you. I always like to take a view of the artists of asking them, what else can I do to help create an environment that helps you make you produce your best work? And so, but it's an open and continual dialogue, because some people are a bit reticent to want to speak up, and last thing one is people to hold back when they really could have helped themselves and their production by speaking up. So I'm always up for big fan of there's no such thing as a stupid question. Just keep the conversation flowing. It's continual.
Thank you, Bro Ade.
And I also would like to check them all what their disability access requirements may be, and how else I can nurture and facilitate a cultural safe space for them. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like, Bro Ade, what you're talking about there is, we're talking about the relationship between independent producers and independent artists, and really
that's correct.
Treating one another holistically. It's all of us, all of us that we bring to the work. Is that
Key
right?
word is respect.
Yeah. Freya, I'm going to throw it to you to share your experiences.
Yeah, I think it's really true what Ade was saying there about this open and continual dialogue, and it has been raised by everyone throughout this, because no relationship remains static or remains the same. These are evolving dialogues, and you also touched on it then, Rani. It is, I think you can't get away from it, and I'm sure that maybe some of the attendees of this can hear in the way that we are all describing our relationships with artists, that it does run into the personal. And this is common within the arts in general, but I think in particular with this kind of really close relationship where you're really another kind of creative collaborator, you know, there needs to be a lot of trust there, particularly because, you know, when I think about the responsibility that I have to effectively communicate about somebody else's practice when they might not be there, it's kind of quite a serious and I guess it's a serious obligation, and it's hard to get there first. I think Ali brought it up before about how long it can take before you might even do something together, and that's partly because you have to find the language, really understand that person's work. How do they work? How do they make their work? What is that like when it's seen by audiences? So I think, you know, the biggest thing that I personally feel is that this trust issue that we've kind of brought up a lot, and the requirement of a long time period to build trust, but also for me, I have to be really interested in the art that's being made, because and this is also a style of producing. You know, I'm not super comfortable personally trying to speak about work that I'm not interested in, that I'm not sort of invested in, that I don't think is valuable creatively. I find it much easier to speak honestly and passionately, and to make those partly because the people that we're speaking to, they're also passionate people, they're also really engaged people. That, you know, presenters aren't just one kind of nebulous group of people who all think and feel the same way. You know, there's curation is an art form practice, and so when I'm in dialogue with curators, presenters, producers, you know, I'm trying to make that connection for them if the artist can't be there to do it themselves. So I think that's super important for me. They need to understand the art form or forms, understand the artists, and be interested in that.
And Freya, it's interesting because you use the word obligation, right, in terms of representing your artists well and in the way that they want to be represented. It also sounds like it's quite a responsibility. You know, it's quite a responsibility, yes. And you take it really seriously. And it almost sounds like you're describing almost like an ethical framework, actually.
Yes, I think, yeah, that may be a better way to look at it as well. Perhaps, you know, thinking of it through personal relationships is not as useful as thinking about it through that obligation to one another, that ethical understanding that you're trying to do right by one another, which is the building blocks of trust anyway. So,
yeah, thank you. Ali, and then Kuan, I'll throw it to you now.
Yeah, I agree with all the points that have been made so far, and probably to add to the discussion, I think I want to talk about the importance of the collaboration and the trust and the compassion and the listening between the artist and the producer, and the capacity to have that, but also to realize that, you know, what we do, we actually help to enable things that are actually not really that possible. And sometimes they're not even, they don't, at the beginning, it's like that some of the artistic ideas that we're supporting are, you know, pretty unusual. And sometimes the artists we're working with are setting themselves like quite challenging projects and asking themselves very challenging questions as they make their art. And then they want to take that and put it into a context. So, it's we make things that are kind of not possible in a way. We help to make them possible, but they're not really that possible in the first place if you really look at them. So we're kind of like the suspension of disbelief of like, you know, oh yeah, we can do that. Of course we can do that. I have no idea how we're doing that, but we're going to do it somehow it'll happen. But also just to put on this point that we're working in, we all take a lot of risks. The artists are taking a lot of risks. we're taking a lot of risk as producers, and we're working in a challenging environment. Now, working with a producer doesn't necessarily take the challenges away, but I think what we're all working really hard to do is to kind of like minimize the impact and to try and help the artists and ourselves to build sustainable practices and to be successful in a challenging environment, which is not easy. And I think that thing around sort of the trust and the listening and the compassion is really important, because you're going to really work through some challenges across producing just a singular project or a series of projects, or getting seriously involved in one another's careers. And it's like you have the artist's career, you have your own career, and they become so intertwined and interdependent that every move you make affects the other. So you're kind of in this situation of interdependence on one another, actually. But I do think that thing about working in a very challenging environment, you have to be really kind to each other. You really have to, very, very supportive of one another in that space, because the level of risk that is being taken all the time, ongoingly.
Thanks, Ali. I will bring that point in again in terms of challenging environment with the final question after this, but I'm keen to hear from Kuan as well in terms of, in your experience, what makes a relationship between independent artists and independent producers work? Thanks, Kuan.
I think first of all, we must remind ourselves we cannot assume that the relationship between an artist and a producer would be natural, that the chemistry would come naturally. I think it really takes lots of hard work, of open conversation. And I think to reach the stage where Ali and describe about being able to second guess each other's expectations or to work on the project in a very intimate way, I think that's a very precious kind of working together. So I was reading an article and it brought me to the idea of, like, before the producer came along, there was the idea of the creative producer and the arts manager, which could be like very essentially like conflicting kind of ideas, like why do the artists want to be managed? Some of them could be fiercely independent and want to work on their own. What does a producer have to do about creativity and artistry? So there was an article that I read which was about at the beginning of an artist's career, the artist often has to depend a lot more on the producer to get the work going. But when the artist's career takes off, he or she becomes more successful, there's an inclination for the relationship to break away, because at that point in time, the work becomes naturally. So so you can imagine, like, the process of the working relationship is not constant, it's always static and changing. And I used to work with Margaret Ling Tan, who's a toy piano virtuoso, Singaporean. She lives in New York. She's 76 years old this year. And she has self-processed kind of OCD. And it took me quite a long time, maybe after 2 years working with her, to realize, like, there are moments where you're in the same room with her and you have to really understand that the conditions that she has as a musician, that you have to second guess why is she perhaps being so demanding at some point in this project, and how do you work around it? And I think reaching that stage of being able to second guess as a producer what's the next step to be done, that's super important.
Thank you. I'm also wondering if our Australian-based colleagues, do you want to respond to any of the points that Kuan said, especially in terms of that trajectory in an artist's career? Because I wonder if that's context-specific as well. Freya,
I'm just sort of also thinking about, we have all been talking about this kind of creative relationship, and as Kuan was just mentioning, even kind of having to know people so well that you can kind of predict one another's behaviors. But I would just say, for people sort of watching and listening to this as well, one of the practical implications of that is around finances. I think we can't forget that there's often a financial relationship occurring here, and it's why trust is so important, because you know, one of the difficulties that can happen is if you start a relationship that perhaps is starting from an, you know, and this is extremely common where you might not be paid for the first thing that you might do together or whatever. You've come in halfway through something to help out. But it's really important early on to create a space for having those conversations as well about value, about what your value is, because as Ali pointed out, it's a precarious and risky venture being an independent artist and being an independent producer. And there's so much intertwined or interdependence that occurs through that relationship. But the financial side of it is really real. And having a, you know, I expressed earlier the way that what I consider important in terms of some of the producing relationships that I have, but that does have a financial implication because it means that I'm not choosing to do other things, and that the things that I'm choosing to do, I have to kind of have those frank conversations with those people about how we're going to make it work for one another. You know, and I can sort of see already in the Q&A some questions, you know, touching on that kind of thing. But I think it's important. This is a huge part of the relationship. This is a big, big part of it. The kind of practical implication of how we make these choices and what we're willing to compromise on sometimes as well to make sure that we can retain a stable practice. You know, and that there's many choices that can be made there. But I sort of think it's important to mention that this conversation about creativity and trust, it does have financial implications.
Thanks, Freya. Yeah.
I really agree with that, Freya. Sorry, I really agree with that. And I also just wanted to raise another little point, because I'm not sure if it's going to come up as we go along, but it's something that I've spoken about a lot with my producer colleagues, and it's about the artists and the way that artists, and I think we're touching on it now a little bit, the way the artist comes to a producer and what sort of working relationship they're wanting to have. But there's something about what the artist is looking for, and it's really important for them to develop artists' understanding of what a producer might do and how a producer might work with them, because some are looking for more management, for example, and administration and project management, and kind of they want to be really managed, and others want to be freer, and well, not freer necessarily, but they want the producer to come in and do very specific things that might be around sort of market development, it might be around career development, it might be around branding or marketing or those types of things. And I think sometimes in the early stages of artists and producers coming together, sometimes the reason why it's not quite working is that they're not quite the right fit, but sometimes the expectation of the artist isn't sitting in a slightly different place to what that particular producer can actually do. And so I think there's sort of something around, and this is the Salon series is kind of about, is about trying to deepen our understanding of what producers do and how they work, and who you might work with and how they might work, and us articulating what we do so we can be really clear about that. Because sometimes, you know, a little bit of time gets wasted, you know, things like that, because, you know, yeah, the expectations are not sitting in the right place at the beginning. So those conversations of Freya, they're so important, those early ones. Yeah.
I'm just aware of time, and sorry, Bro Ade, what did you have your hand up? Yep.
I just wanted to elaborate on Freya's fine and very valid point about the importance of exploring that trust factor, because and what I talked about before about, you know, look for the alignment of values, synergy of purpose, because when you adopt a project, it becomes so essentially part of your essence of being, and that drives you so to your deepest core that, you know, you need to know that you're in it for the right reason with the right people. And as for trust, it's like what I always say to my son: work hard to make your word your one, because at the end of the day, your word is who you are. That's a great way to earn the respect and trust, you know.
Thanks, everyone. I will just move us on to the final question, which, you know, we have touched on throughout this conversation so far. It's about, you know, working in challenging environments, right? And trying to find a way to be successful and sustainable in a challenging environment together. Now, obviously, we have all of our lives have shifted due to COVID-19. So, and I'm aware this might be a sensitive question to unpack. So please, only share what you are comfortable to. But what are independent producers doing to navigate COVID-19 now? Bro Ade, did you want to kick us off?
Well, if I can draw your attention to a recent article in Wednesday's Age, as well as with the pattern makers, it is very interesting to note that there are great learnings that you can take on board, because a large percentage of the population are understandably more hesitant to attend live events. I think 4 out of 5. And what that translates to is that they also are happier to attend online and pay for online shows, and that means that we need to give people a choice and keep an open mind and open heart to reinventing the way we deliver performances, whether it incorporates an online component or whether it incorporates, pure live. Something that just needs to be factored in, and that one also has to take note that as others have said, we could be looking at a future situation where performances are a hybrid of live plus online plus stream, so forth. So it'll come different incarnations. So and people are happier outside and happier to attend, say, small events where they feel there is less chance of contracting COVID. I think it figures something like 80%, 4 out of 5, will be happy to come out to a live performance if it eliminates a chance of catching COVID, or there is at least some treatment or a vaccine in future to help protect them, because we have to look for ourselves as well, after ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for giving that context as well.
I think I answered the question.
Yep. Kuan, did you want to continue?
Yeah, maybe I share a little bit about the Singapore context. Strangely enough, even though in Melbourne, because of the pandemic, I feel like I can still connect and engage with my colleagues back home by attending Zoom seminars like this. So I felt like the government has put a lot of opportunities for digital content, and I feel like my colleagues, independent producers, they have sort of risen to the challenge. So people have started learning, doing projects like on Zoom theater, webinars. They have really taken the mantle of learning these skills, and I had quite a very fascinating chat with my colleague, because she started like a Zoom theater series of ballet theater. So the play readings are done via Zoom in this format, and the vocabulary that she used to describe the experience of producing, it felt as if there was no difference if she was producing live theater. And I found that really interesting, how she described how the actors auditioned, how the directors rehearsed the actors. So I feel like as producers, independent producers, I think we're quite agile to respond to these things, to learn these skills on the go. Like we are not stuck in an institution where we have maybe there's a procurement process. We can think of ideas quite quickly out of the box, and these tools of the internet in a way they're pretty low cost to adopt. And I'm developing a project with an independent dance artist next year back home in April. And already we're assuming that the pandemic won't go away so fast. So we're assuming that perhaps the status quo by then, even in April, we still have to imagine what would it be like under the current conditions. And of course, it's a learning curve, but I think people are really starting to adapt. It's no longer so much like as nostalgia for the kind of what we used to have, like in February. And I think that's an amazing part of being independent. You really think on the fly, and you develop it as it goes. Yeah.
Thank you. Freya, did you want to respond?
I think the thing that I've spent a lot of time doing is, and also just to put in context, prior to this, a lot of my work was about international relationships, whether that be through, networks that I might be a part of, or through, practical touring, presentation, this kind of things, marketplace events. There is obviously a sense of loss and grieving, really, to be honest, about the lack of ability to connect with colleagues in person. However, on the flip side of that, I think I've spent a lot of time reaching out to different networks in Australia and internationally. And I think, because artists and producers that have similar and some overlapping networks, but quite a lot of diverging ones as well. And so in those conversations, I'm trying to, develop my understanding of regional specificity, country to country specificity, and even Cien's description of the very specific things that are occurring with his Singaporean colleagues. It's just like the tip of the iceberg. It's like every single country is quite different. Like we have our region, but within that, every country is at a different stage of this pandemic, but also culturally approaching this kind of period of kind of change in different ways, obviously dependent also on its government situation, the availability of funds and things like that. But all that sort of thing is really interesting. Like a lot of these conversations I have go from the practical, like, are you allowed to leave your country, as is the case for us, to kind of, oh, you went to a show last week. Wow. Like there's kind of, how are you doing X, Y, Z, or what are you expecting next year? So there's this kind of like big openness as well, generosity that I'm experiencing. And I'd say, what is the purpose of that? Well, the purpose is that I am looking for opportunities, of course, but I'm also looking for a deeper understanding that I can share with the people that I work with, whether they're the artists, colleagues, whatever, that kind of, I think we're in a really interesting moment of openness and candor, which is a silver lining for what it is otherwise, an incredibly challenging environment. And I would also say the other thing that I do is write so many grants. I mean, I genuinely don't think I've ever written or so many grant budgets, so many versions of budgets, so many different opportunities. And it's not, obviously I feel really lucky in Australia that there are so many opportunities to do, but I would also say I've noticed a little bit of fatigue amongst my producing colleagues about this, which feels like we have moved away from the more pleasurable aspects of what we do, which is the connection with art and artists, to really just writing about it, and which is the same issue for artists as well, of course.
I will just thank you, Freya, for giving that really nuanced sense of what you've been up to. Ali, did you want to just make maybe one point, and then I will move us on to the Q&A, just to make sure that there's time for that.
Okay, I'll try.
I know.
I think one of the biggest things that I've been doing is just slowing right down. And I've been engaged in very deep conversation with my network, my local network and my international network. I've not been in a hurry to modify practices or jump online or do anything like that. I've spent a lot of time listening. And what I'm just now finding is that a few natural, I'm working very organically and very intuitively at the moment, and a few kind of natural projects and opportunities have started to emerge that I couldn't have imagined 2 months ago. They're just starting to come, and I feel by really listening to my artists and really listening to the curators and programmers I work with globally, I'm able to hear and I'm able to be involved in and connect with some really interesting projects, and they're happening organically and they're not forced, and I feel deeply grateful for that. The other thing I wanted to say really quickly is that I've been able to do a lot of advocacy over this time, and normally I don't have time to advocate because I'm so flat out trying to keep a sustainable practice and trying to keep my artists in a sustainable practice. So I'm really deeply appreciating the opportunity to be able to actually talk about and consult and activate some of my concerns about our sector and things that I feel there's problems and gaps, and actually just, you know, get on email or get on Zoom and just talk about stuff, which I normally would love to do, but I don't usually have time.
Thank you. I'm getting the sense there's been definitely some challenges, but also some silver linings for all of you. So that concludes the discussion, you know, between all of us as panelists. I am just conscious that, you know, we've been sharing a lot of information in the last over an hour. So I will just call a 1-minute break in case anyone needs a glass of water, just to stretch, anything you need. And I'm just going to bring on Jamie Lewis at the end of that 1 minute. So just 1 minute, and we'll come back online. Come on back when you're ready, everyone. So I'm just going to introduce my colleague, Jamie Lewis. Jamie, do you mind turning on your video? So Jamie's the program manager at Theatre Network Australia, and she's also been being across all the questions in the Q&A function. And Jamie will be directing specific questions to specific panelists. Jamie, take it away.
Great. I'm going to put this one to Cien actually, and being specifically also because being Singaporean, I get a bit of this context, and I feel like we've seen this change in Singapore. So you could probably talk to this in a context where, you know, the current kind of culture and context is a lot of artists who self-produce, and there aren't that many independent producers yet. What are some ways to begin establishing a producing culture where there isn't one? What are some essential things to start with?
So maybe I should share a little bit about the producing collective that I'm part of. It's Producers SG. So it's a community network for independent cultural workers. So you could be an independent producer, you could be an independent artist. And what we do is we advocate and support the sector by hosting kind of regular monthly socials where people come together just to hang out, just to speak, to know each other. And we found that we've done it since 2017. So we've done monthly socials. We also have a Facebook group. We have a monthly e-digest. And we found that over the course of over 2 years, by just organizing like a meeting point for people to get together, people who may not know one another well, people who are in search of a collaborator, people have found connections. People who want to produce, they have found opportunities. It's just about making friends. And we found that that's super useful. I find that we need to break away from the idea of the producer as a sole individual, as an independent freelancer. I think it's important to work with others in a collective way. And I think in the Singapore space, that's super important to be able to harness the knowledge of your colleagues and to be reciprocal in offering whatever you know as well. And partially I say that because I guess civil society in Singapore is a little bit more difficult and weak. So the idea of coming together to advocate for the kind of conditions that you want to to have for yourself and for your colleagues, that's very important, I think, and crucial.
Thanks, Cien. I might ask Ellie to add on to that, actually, if you can, just in terms of the word advocacy has come up again, and you have such a long experience in this field. How do you feel like Australia has advocated for independent producers and the role of producers? Anything you've noticed in this time?
It's been interesting because there wasn't, I mean, I feel like I probably was at the beginning of this sort of independent movement away from company producers, moving outside company structures and working in a more freelance sort of model. And I remember when I started my own practice, I started it as an experiment for 12 months to see if I could, to see if it would work, because I didn't know whether it would work. So I went, I'm just going to do this thing for 12 months. I didn't have a company name. I didn't have anything. I didn't do anything official. I still don't have a website. So, I mean, I just really didn't do anything. I just went, I'm going to just work for a few different people and see what happens. And it just absolutely took off. Like the first year, you know, before the start of the year, by the end of the year, I was just completely flat out. You know, I couldn't believe it. So there was definitely a need. And I think that what's happened over time is that people have noticed that there are certain artists that are working with certain independent producers in Victoria and Australia more broadly, that has suddenly been seeming to achieve these things that go beyond what anyone's really seen before. Like there's been some incredible results. And I think it's because of the closeness of the relationship between the artist and the producer and the effectiveness of that relationship. And I think that what has happened over time is that that's been noticed by organisations and funding organisations within Australia, and slowly but surely there's been various initiatives and various amounts of money that have been made available to start to build your producing practice, or to engage a producer, or to, you know, I mean, we've gone from a time where you wouldn't necessarily put a producer line in a budget to Australia Council Creative Victoria. Now you wouldn't really imagine putting an application in and potentially not having that in your budget. Like it's sort of quite changed quite radically. And I think then there's the whole VIPI thing. I mean, there's been a build towards that. I don't think that came from nowhere, but it's been this gradual build that has led us to this space now where it's quite a recognized profession, and it's one that we're definitely nurturing.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Thanks, Ellie. Going to direct the next question to Freya, just as a continuation of the points you made earlier about value and the investment that producers come with at the start. Just specifically around navigating that conversation with the artists that you work with, and any advice on how you navigate that, as it's often quite tricky and complex.
Yeah, I think probably it's useful just to say really practically how I personally approach it, because I'm sure that the producers here all have a different kind of system or expectation. But personally, when I started my practice, very similarly to Ali, I was like, I'll give it a go. I'll see who might want to work with me, who I might want to work with. And it's really still a very small enterprise, is what I would say. But part of what I committed to was having conversations extremely early with artists about money. And that was to test myself, because it was something that I felt challenged by. Those conversations aren't easy, especially when you just really want to start a relationship in a positive way. So, and you don't want to like scare anyone. But increasingly, I've noticed that artists will start with that very early when they might approach me now. So it's become easier. I'm not sure whether I have created the environment where that would happen, or whether, as Ali points out, there's a kind of, there's something going on where people have a greater understanding of what a producer might offer. Maybe people speak to their colleague artists or whatever and get a sense of how to have that conversation. I'm not sure what it is. I haven't asked, but I would say, you know, very early, even it might even be the initial conversation, either myself or the artist that I'm speaking with, you know, will say at the end of this conversation, I'll send you some figures about the way that I work, you know, what those costs might look like and what they really might look like over a year, because you might get a number that actually, you know, this is how much it costs for an hour or a day or whatever, but in actual fact, the number of hours or the number of days you might need in a year is so small that total amortized across a year is hugely valuable. So me personally, I do that early on, and I encourage artists to ask those questions, not to feel like it's taboo or anything, because I think most producers would be relieved that you were perhaps thinking about it as a cost to include in your grants, in your projects. It just shows that you're considering that as a valuable relationship in the same way that you would want to pay your artistic collaborators.
Thank you. I guess it segues to this other question about how do artists approach a producer. Maybe Brody, this is a question for you. And I want to flip the question actually to how have some artists approached you that you found have been great and useful in terms of negotiating a working relationship with them?
Well, I'm a fan of what we in the screen industry call one pager. It's just a basic, very brief, concise document that gives guts exactly what the strength of the project is, to allow me to then seek the synergy, you know? That makes sense? Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Freya, do you want to add to that just in terms of how an artist have approached you? Like you said, you want to encourage them to do certain things. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah. When I was first starting my practice, I think that I was already working with a few people, but I did actually make some overtures myself. As I became busier, I couldn't do that anymore, and it now is a little bit more of a situation where people do approach me. And to be honest, people just do it really out of the blue. And often I am not able to take on any more work, or maybe the art form is not something that I have expertise in, but I know other producers that might. And actually, informally, a lot of producers will say, oh, this person approached me and I can't do this. Would you mind if I give them your email or whatever? That happens quite a lot, usually with the kind of permission of both the producer and the artist to kind of do that. But I would encourage people to just seek out, you know, emails and like cold emails. It's totally fine. And maybe, you know, that's not going to be the relationship that goes anywhere because of various reasons, but maybe it leads you to one that can go somewhere. And so I don't think, I'm less interested in facilitated meetings, I would say. I find that those environments are sometimes quite challenging because they set up a false expectation of maybe what people are looking for, what people might be able to offer. Even though I am aware that then it can sometimes feel like there's a barrier to making contact or knowing who to contact. I think it's been pointed out that VIPI and TNA in general now have a sort of there's an entity as well to kind of approach as well about saying, is there a list of producers, or, you know, and I do think there could be more work done in our industry in general about, you know, maybe promoting who is actively being an independent producer and that kind of more public facing thing. But certainly I don't discourage anyone from just sending out those emails if you like the sound of what someone's working on. Or the other thing is also really basic stuff, like just look, if you enjoyed a show or you really like a particular artist, look at the credits. Do they work with a producer? Is that someone who you've heard of? Or maybe that person can introduce you, or, you know, like maybe they've got a Facebook page, all of those things, you know, that's also worth it as well. Because as Ali pointed out, sometimes it seems like, oh, this artist is like suddenly everywhere, and then you kind of look in the credits, oh, they've got a producer.
Yeah, thanks, Freya. Ellie, just to add to that, how do you negotiate the conversation about when it comes to fees? I guess the way I'm reading some of these questions as well as feedback I've often heard from artists looking for producers is, you know, I haven't got the budget yet, I haven't got the funding yet. How do I approach a producer when I don't know if I can pay them? What's usually the kind of conversation you have there?
Oh, it's tricky.
Especially, just to add to that, especially when they then need, they're looking for a producer to support that next phase of finding funding and finding financial resource.
It's really interesting. I guess for me, before I talk about money, I really take a really close look at the work, the artistic work, to see if it's something that I feel I have the right kind of contacts and networks for, but also importantly, something that I really believe in. So probably not going to get to a first base conversation about any of that until I'm sort of sold on an artistic level, first of all, and then also on an interpersonal level too. So I guess for me, when I start working with an artist, I don't necessarily, it's usually we just start doing a few little things together, and it's down the track that we'll announce that we're an artist producer team. But to begin with, we're not, because I kind of need to work with people for a while to see if I can work with them. Like, can we work together? Do we work together? Is this a good idea? Is it not a good idea? So I guess that's sort of the way it goes. But then if all of those ducks have lined up, then I think it's just one of the most important things is that as you're working towards fundraising and creating money for the work, that the producer is recognised as a co-collaborator on the projects, so that there's always a budget line for a producer on absolutely everything. Because if you don't have that, then it's going to be virtually impossible to support a producer. Well, it's going to be impossible to support anybody. I guess it's that thing that Freya said too. Yeah, it's about you know, there is a period of time where you're not necessarily working for money at the beginning, potentially. For me personally, I always keep track of those hours with the idea that they'll be remunerated eventually, but it might take a while. So sometimes there's a kind of gap between when that turns around. But if we're the right match and if we're working strongly together, I feel confident that extra money funding, gigs, tours, everything, presenting opportunities will actually happen. So I actually feel confident that if I've got the right artist producer match, then we will be successful. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried if suddenly I'm doing, like, you know, all these hours that haven't been paid for yet, because I feel confident they will be paid for. So yeah.
I just wanted to say that it's not always clear, but pretty much all producers don't get any sort of ongoing organizational or practice-based funding, and that's why this kind of question is really hard to answer, because what it's really about is doing work, unpaid labor, and it goes to this broader issue in our sector. You know, and it's about respect and trust, but of course very difficult to know about those things, as Ali pointed out, at the start of a relationship. But it's just good to point out that practical reality is that for the vast majority of independent producers, we don't have some kind of ongoing income support that allows us to do a lot of work for free.
Which often also means that is the reason why we're also kind of working with different people, because it's sort of a part of the way that you start to build something that might begin to be sustainable, because artists have their journeys, they have their making journeys. You know, they're making a work every second year, or they're making a work every year, or, you know, they've made a work and it's like hugely successful and suddenly it's touring everywhere. They make another work which is also hugely successful, except there isn't really a market for that work at this moment in time, because it doesn't move, doesn't mean it's not a good work. So there's all those things. So you need the sort of mix in your portfolio of kind of mutually, well, for me, I work with artists I think are mutually beneficial. So the network that I'm contacting is similar all the time, which helps because it means I can talk about a broad amount of work with one person. I can talk about everybody, which really helps. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think that really paints a kind of good broad picture to respond to that question. We've all but answered one of the questions from the Q&A, but I think that question also, as you can tell from the entire response, it's like there's this continual ongoing learning. No one really suddenly gets qualified to be a producer. You kind of start on the first project and keep getting better at it, really, isn't it? So I might just throw it back to Rani to wrap up.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks a lot. So yeah, and I also just want to direct attendees to the Theatre Network Australia Independent Producers Database, and the link I posted in the chat earlier. If you do want to contact some producers, if you are a producer that you would like to be on there, you're welcome to add your details there too. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to our closed captioners, Marissa and Lachlan, our Auslan interpreters, Amber and Susan, and our stage manager from APAM, Fraser. I do just want to announce some of the upcoming VIPI opportunities coming up. So round 2 of the Unlocking Capacity Grant opens on the 20th of August and closes at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on 17th September 2020 for those of you who are Victorian-based independent producers. You can find more info about VIPI on our website, so tna.org.au. And then from August onwards, in terms of the VIPI Salon Series, what we'll start organizing are coaching sessions between independent artists and independent producers. So if you're an independent artist or you're an independent producer who is interested in being involved in those, please feel free to email me. So my email is just rani@tna.org.au, and also it's all over the TNA website as well. So yeah, Bro Ade, you wanted to say?
I just want to take this opportunity to express my profound appreciation to all my fellow producers for their stunning sidewalk contributions this afternoon, and to encourage anyone who'd like to keep in touch with me. Please bear in mind that the thing about having a name Djajamihardja is that I confidently say that I'm the only Djajamihardja in the world. So I'm easy to find on Facebook, LinkedIn, and anywhere else. Okay, so please reach out. Appreciate it very much.
That's funny, Ade. I am also the only Freya Waterson in the world.
Really?
We're both unique. Beautifully unique.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming along today.
Thank you.
And we'll be publishing this video online on tna.org.au.
Thanks so much, Freya. Rani.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
And Eid Mubarak.
I'll have her. Stop video now.
Thank you.